Hi, this is Cal Ripken Jr., and you're listening to the ML Sports Platter.
The ML Sports Platter back with you all over the major platforms. Download, subscribe, listen. 5-star reviews and feedback are appreciated. All a part of the Brawl Network, and find our network on Twitter at Network Brawl. I'm on Twitter at Mike L Sports, and all over the social media platforms with videos, hot takes, articles, and much, much more. Brought to you by Empower Federal Credit Union, Axe Exotic Pets, and Rosie's Corner. Yes, indeed. This week, Rosie's is off, but if you're in and around Central New York, get back next week after their little break from spending some time with friends and family for their themed food days like Meatloaf Monday, Fish Friday, and more. Rosie's Corner, a proud ML Sports Platter sponsor, and a big thanks as well to Camilla's Golf Club and the Vince Aguirre Consulting Group. Log on to vcgtransforms.com. That's vcgtransforms.com. Become a better leader both personally and professionally. Boy, am I excited to bring on the next guest of the ML Sports Platter, a terrific, terrific director of so many amazing films, and of course the latest one being Al Davis versus the NFL, 30 for 30. It is Ken Rodgers, and you can get him on Twitter at Ken Rodgers NFL. Of course, the showhead of Hard Knocks on HBO, the director of 4 ESPN 30 for 30 films, as previously mentioned there, Belichick and Saban, of course, on HBO, and The Art of Coaching Future Novelists. It's just so good, outlining so many things with Belichick and Saban, their similarities and their greatness as the years have gone on. Again, on Twitter, at Ken Rodgers NFL, the terrific filmmaker and director. Ken, welcome aboard. Congratulations on the latest 30 for 30, Al Davis versus the NFL. Such a treat to have you aboard, and it's been a while, my man.
Well, thank you for having me, as always.
When did Al Davis become Al Davis?
When he was born, I think, is the true answer. I think it's easy to say that he was made by his experiences, but so much of him was just bred by his birthright. I mean, his personality was baked in, and that was just to be a competitor. I think a lot of it had to do with his father was pretty demanding. He had an older brother who he competed with. He grew up in the fairly tough streets of Brooklyn in the day. The environment was always there. And then, there's just something innate in him that he always wanted to compete. This is a guy that didn't really care what it was. He wanted to finish first. And that worked on the football field. But in the business world, that is the NFL, when you become an owner, that doesn't always fly. When you have partners like the NFL owners that you are supposed to work with, and of course the NFL sees itself as, the shield, the overarching brand of the National Football League, where the owners make decisions together, he didn't really fit in with the rest of them.
I love the Syracuse University part in there. I am glad that you did that, the old pictures. And what's amazing in the history of Syracuse football, and we tend to remember that more, by the way, than modern times, what comes up is Jim Brown and Ernie Davis and Floyd Little and, Donovan McNabb and Dwight Freeney and Art Monk and Larry Zonka. And the history. I could go on and on and on here, and you know that I've covered a lot of the SU football in Central New York. And you go all the way down the line, and you keep mentioning guys. You keep going to the Joe Morrises and on through, and Don McPherson and Dick McPherson and Tim Green. And very rarely does anybody say, oh, hey, by the way, Al Davis. How important was it for you to at least have a little splash of Cuse in there, Ken?
I think it was important because I think that's where he realized he was not going to play football.
Yeah.
That's where he realized, all right, I can't handle the game as a player, so how am I going to do it? And he has a great line in the film that, my former boss, Steve Sable, said, where were you picked? When kids were chosen, were you picked first? Were you picked last on teams? And he said, well, I'd like to think I was the chooser.
Yeah.
And that's really something that cemented itself at Syracuse. That's where he realized, I don't need to be the player. I want to run things. That's what I'm best at, is being the boss, is being the visionary. And he had already started thinking about building an organization. And he grew up seeing the Yankees, and he said, I want to, build the finest organization in sports. He wanted to build a brand. And he had that in his mind already while he was a college student. And, it ended up being that Raiders black and silver that we know so well. And in the 70s, certainly by the late 70s, it's pretty hard to argue that wasn't the most recognizable brand in sports, and really the finest organization in sports.
No doubt, no doubt. So Pete Rozelle and Al Davis, the battles, of course, Davis versus the NFL, the main reason for the film. What do you think, Ken, Pete Rozelle learned from Al Davis, and what do you think Davis learned from Rozelle?
I think Rozelle learned pretty clearly in his losses to Al Davis. Not a lot of people remember that Al Davis won these lawsuits against the National Football League. I think he learned that he couldn't control the National Football League any longer by his sheer will. That the game and the sport and the business of the National Football League had gotten too big. And he built it to become that big. He made it a juggernaut. But it became so big that it became out of his control. And you see what it is today. It can't be run by one person. It can't. I mean, it's a giant. It's an industry. It isn't a company anymore. And when Pete Rozelle took over, it was a little league that needed a leader, and he could run things by himself, and he was sort of a CEO. And by the time the 80s came around, it was much, much more than that. There was too many politics. He's testifying in front of Congress. There's way too many things involved for him to be able to hold it all together himself. So he probably lived a shorter life trying to do that, and he wore himself out. And had he learned that earlier, he might have lived longer. I think Al Davis probably learned by the end of his life that he could have fought a little bit less with bitterness. There's a great line in the film by his son, Mark Davis, who owns the team now, that Mark learned growing up with his father, that sometimes it's better to cook with sugar rather than salt. And that's what he did. Mark Davis did in order to get the new stadium in Las Vegas. And I think by the end, I think Al Davis realized that he spent so much energy in court cases and fighting the league that he forgot that what he really loved doing was the football part.
Yeah.
What he learned to do at Syracuse, what he was born to do in the streets of Brooklyn, to coach football. I mean, he was an incredible coach that turned a team around in the Raiders. He was a GM. He was a scout. He was the commissioner of the AFL. He was a football guy, and then he got caught up in the ownership. And I think by the end, he realized that he wasted a decade or two when he could have been concentrating on football. I think both of them sort of understood that it got out of hand.
That's such a good answer. Ken Rodgers is our guest on the ML Sports Platter, brought to you by Camillus Golf Club and Empower Federal Credit Union. You can get Ken on Twitter at Ken Rodgers NFL, the filmmaker, the terrific director of 4 ESPN 30 for 30 films and HBO's Belichick and Saban, the Art of Coaching. And as we've talked about so many times, the Four Falls of Buffalo is amazing and so close to my heart, of course, because of my long time as a Bills fan, and now the latest, of course, which you can watch, I guess, probably on replay here, right, Ken, in some of the ESPN Plus channel and all the rest of it with the Al Davis
That's
versus
right.
NFL. It's all over.
Yeah. ESPN Plus, yeah. And I got to say, Four Falls of Buffalo, got quite a boost this year.
Damn right it did. Yeah, baby.
I think the ratings for Four Falls of Buffalo really went through the roof. We January.
Yeah, that damn team almost really made that Norwood kick goes through the goalpost at the end. I mean, can you imagine? By the way, and I know we're doing the Davis NFL, but could you imagine? And this is a good spot to ask you. Can you imagine that team, that city, Super Bowl champion? I mean, can you did the Four Falls. You talked to the old guys. How do we process that?
It's oh boy, it's tough. I have kind of mixed feelings. I really was hoping it happened. Of course, I think it would be incredible for them to win. And I have sort of mixed feelings as a Philly fan. I was 6 years old in 1980 when Philadelphia won a title, when the Phillies won, and it took 25 years until I was 31 years old to win another, and that's in a team with all four major sports. So it felt. We took a lot of pride in that. Hey, we're the tough guys that are going to hold out and, finally win one. And there's a lot of pride in finally winning that one, and it feels incredible.
Yeah.
But when it's over, when you win that one, there is a little bit loss of identity.
Sure. And when are you going to do it again and created expectations?
Yeah, and you become sort of just another team.
Yeah.
And I would never want them to not win one, but there is something just special about what they're going through. And of course you don't want to go through it, but there is something so unique and special about that bond between that team and the fans that I just don't think it'll be quite the same when they win. Of course, like I said, you wouldn't want it to go away, but I think historically, look at the Cubs.
Yep.
Look at the Red Sox.
Yep.
Once they win, it's sort of, they don't have that story anymore. And they kind of just become another team. The Red Sox don't have that aura anymore. And I'll be sad to see that part go, but boy, I will be happy to see the Bills win a Super Bowl. And I really, the biggest thing is I really hope it happens in the lifetimes of all those players that were featured in the Four Falls of Buffalo.
Yeah, there's no doubt how special it would be. And of course, the year they sweep the division, 6-0, 13-3, win 2 playoff games at home. Of course, no fans, right? Of course. Come on, 6,700 people, the most people that could see. That stadium probably crumbles to the ground in the playoffs if it's normal circumstances. And, yeah, it'll be wild times. I think you bring up a really interesting point, though, about identity and how people view you and how people pull for you. But I think with the Bills, I think they'd be in a special category of, the mixed bag. Like, man, you guys went through a lot of this and you're a champion. Like, you have both ends now. Where, like, some teams that kind of get close, but it's not as heartbreaking. Maybe like the Lightning recently, like they were knocking on the door for a while, and like this whole, Tampa Bay stuff with the Bucks. I'm like, right. Yeah, okay, they're a historical laughingstock, but they're the only team in the NFL that can say they're a historic laughingstock that also has 2 titles. Like they're kind of in a different spot. It is weird, but I think you bring up a fascinating point about identity.
We owe it to Buffalo as a country, and that was one of the main subtextual themes of Four Falls of Buffalo. If you watch it, is the change not in the Bills. The team, the town, the fans stayed the same through those 4 years. But the way America treated that team changed dramatically.
Yep.
We cheered the first team and loved them as underdogs, and the second year we really, as Americans, thought, oh, good, they're gonna redeem themselves. And by the time they went back the 4th time, they were laughing stocks.
Yeah, and the fatigue set in too. It was up. They're back to get their butts beat. Yeah,
and that goes against everything we teach our kids, that hey, it doesn't matter if you lose, just get up and try again. They should have been held up as heroic in their perseverance, and instead we mocked them as a country, and they were made fun of on The Simpsons and late night talk shows and all that. And that tells you all you need to know about America, that we can say that to our kids, but we value winning way too much.
It's so true, because I remember in 1991 being 12 years old, wearing my Bills coat the day after the Norwood kick missed, and it was, oh man, tough loss, but then my Giant buddies were like, doing 12-year-old stuff, right? That kind of stuff. The next year it was, oh man, go Bills, that kind of stuff. And then the third and the fourth, it was, man, you guys suck. And I was like, wow, like I'm only 13, 14, and by then I was already like well into being a sports fan, knowing I wanted to be in sports media, writing papers in school about it. And I was like, wow, I don't think we suck. I don't really think it's that. And then,
place,
yeah, right. And now, 27 years later, I never imagined the appreciation that would be created for those teams in my older age, because it's been amazing, and I've interviewed a ton of those players, and your special was amazing, and it all kind of comes full circle in a year like 2020, where the Bills, really almost did it. So. It's been really, really remarkable. Through the 30 for 30 films and the HBO stuff, and you keep adding to this incredible resume, Ken. Do you take one little thing from a Four Falls of Buffalo and that you learned and plug it into Al Davis? Do you take Belichick, Saban, and creativity from that and plug it into Al Davis versus the NFL? I mean, do things start to roll into each other in terms of your experience and the cerebral part of doing this?
I think as I age, I start to see stories a little differently. I'm in my mid-late 40s now, and I see a little more. I see films looking back a little bit more rather than present tense. I'm really interested in how things change over time, because I've gotten to that age where I can look back over my life and see how things that I viewed one way, now I view differently. And so that's what I was just describing, with the Bills, the two Bills, the relationship between the two Bills, the relationship between Al Davis and Pete Rozelle. I think if you were to look at my recent work in the large documentary space, there's a nostalgia involved, but it's a re-examination of our nostalgia. And is our nostalgia correct? And what does it mean that we felt that way about the Bills, or that we felt that way about Al Davis? Why do we think Al Davis was a villain, and when in fact, he had a lot of good points, and he actually won these fights? And what's all that mean? And there's a re-examination that I think is happening to these stories in my generation that we thought were pretty simple growing up, and there's a lot more to them.
Ken Rodgers NFL on Twitter, the terrific filmmaker and director for ESPN 30 for 30 films, including Al Davis versus the NFL. Make sure you grab it. Watch it if you haven't already on the reruns, ESPN channels, and ESPN Plus. Also, HBO's Belichick and Saban, The Art of Coaching, future novelist, as well as in the Twitter description. In this Al Davis 30 for 30, Pete Rozelle and Al Davis are living currently on computers with Davis's classic white workout suit and Rozelle, and they're talking to each other almost as if they're living right now. And the programmed idea of it all happened when, Ken? When did that idea come to fruition that, there'd be a little bit of, them talking as if they were living today about this and the times and the rivalry and all the rest?
Well, about a year ago, we made the core decision that we wanted to hear from Al and Pete themselves, that there was no one else that could really tell this story. You think about the people that were around them, and a lot of them are also deceased. The lawyers, the judges that were around. and the other people, Tom Flores, the coach, and players like, Kenny Stabler, like they're okay. They've passed away, or they're also long in the tooth. And well, so how do we tell a story when everyone's unavailable in one way or another, or really not close to the story? So in the old days, we probably would have cast actors. That's been done in documentaries a lot. And maybe we would have put a rubber mask on them to make them look more like Al Davis and Pete Rozelle, or maybe we would have just accepted that they don't really look like Al Davis and Pete Rozelle, which would have been problematic, of course, when you cut to the archive footage. But with digital technology, we're getting closer and closer where we were able to put a digital mask on them and write this scenario where their spirits were still wandering around Allegiant Stadium in the current day, and that they would tell us the story. And that allowed us to put it in sort of a science fiction universe, and not pretend like we found some footage and this is them in the 1980s, and this is what they actually said, because creating these deep fake characters that would cross some sort of moral ground. This is science fiction. These are spirits. These are creations. But all the dialogue was based on archives and research that we did on these two men, very much based on fact and what they felt. And technology is going to get better and better. I think it was a really solid attempt. Certainly the first in sports documentaries. I don't think we had the money that Star Wars had when Carrie Fisher passed away and they brought back Princess Leia. But we're really proud of our Al Davis and Pete Rozelle. And I think hearing from them directly was worth this creative leap, because I just didn't want to hear from anyone else. Those two guys are so magnificent as characters. I didn't want the story told by outsiders.
So I just have two more quick ones for you. I remember on Super Bowl Sunday morning, I had tweeted out, for some people who are young, 20, 21, 22 years old, watching the Super Bowl thinking that everything in the world started in 1999 or 2003 or whatever, that, what you're watching tonight, it's easy to get caught up in the craziness of Mahomes and Brady and the hype in 2 weeks and, the baby goat and the goat and all this other stuff. But you really need to know who Lamar Hunt is. You need to know who Al Davis is. You need to know who Ralph Wilson is. You need to know who Pete Rozelle is. You need to know who all these guys are. The Foolish Club. Harry Wismer, the original 8. The New York Titans and Bob Howsam and Baron Hilton. I mean, these guys. You need to know who these type of people are, because they had the vision. They had the idea. They challenged the NFL, the establishment. And then when the merger hit, and everything started to come of age, and the big money franchises, and the TV wars, and all the rest, that's why the NFL is what it is today. How important is it to you when you run into young people, or when you create a 30 for 30 like this, to get that part of it across with main players like Rozelle and Davis?
When you're doing films about these sort of people, it's critical, but what's also critical is making sure that you are not making it just history-based and tying it to today, as you said. That's part of the reason why we set it in this sort of science fiction universe. Part of the reason why it took place today in Allegiant Stadium. It's because, look, this pays off today. It's relevant to today. This war is why we have Allegiant Stadium today, because Mark Davis learned his lessons. The new stadiums that we have were ushered in because of this war. Stadium architecture and stadium amenities, we would be 10, 15 years behind if Al Davis didn't fight these wars. You know, their luxury suites would be 10, 15 years behind, and you know, even the types of food and stuff that are in stadiums would be behind. And you look simply, you know, early in the film, it was important for us to show Al Davis's football philosophy and, you know, tell people that his philosophy really is what we watch today. You know, in the 1960s, Vince Lombardi's football was pretty mechanical and conservative, and, you know, the power sweep and strong blocking and tackling, and okay, that's fundamental football. Al Davis was, you know, he brought that AFL style of football that was quick strike, long bombs.
Just throw, baby. No.
Aggressive defense.
Yeah, right.
And that is what we cheer for today.
I know.
That's what we love watching today.
Yeah.
And that was Al Davis. He brought that to the National Football League. And that has nothing to do with you know, all this business stuff that film covers. Just when you look at what's on the field, Al Davis might have had the biggest impact on the game today. And so it's important to show the history, but tie it to why it pays off in the current day.
What do you hope people say about it when they get done watching Al Davis versus the NFL?
You know, I think the biggest thing is that, you know, Al Davis wasn't too bad of a guy. I think even I was surprised that although he was a rebel and a malcontent sometimes, and certainly a contrarian, he never really became villainous. He never really crossed the line to where he became a bad person. You know, these men, Rozelle and Davis, they didn't like each other in terms of business, but they went up and shared podiums, and Rozelle had to pass the Lombardi Trophy to Davis 3 times, and Davis never rubbed that in. He never made a public spectacle out of it.
Yeah.
He never even tried to show up his competitor. He had too much respect for him, and he loved the game too much. And the climax of our film is when Pete Rozelle retires, and it's one of the most heartfelt things I've ever seen. And it comes from Al Davis, of all people, describing Rozelle's retirement and how he felt to see Pete Rozelle retire, and their embrace, their physical embrace, their hug when that moment came. And you even hear the word love, and you realize, this was a time period, this Pete Rozelle, Al Davis time period, where having different opinions didn't mean that you crossed the line into personal hatred. And I think that's something we could all learn from today, you know, in this America, where differences of opinion quickly turn personal and turn into hatred. Al Davis and Pete Rozelle, I mean, they fought over millions and millions of dollars. They were opposed at every corner to each other for decades on end. And when it came toward the end of their careers, there was love and respect, because they were sportsmen. They disagreed on business, but they were both good people. And I think too many times we look at Al Davis as a villain, and I don't think he was.
Filmmaker, director of 4 ESPN 30 for 30 films, including 4 Falls of Buffalo and the recent Al Davis versus the NFL. Also the show head of Hard Knocks on HBO and HBO's Belichick and Saban, The Art of Coaching, and a future novelist. Incredible to have you aboard, Ken Rodgers, on Twitter at Ken Rodgers NFL. Congratulations, continued success, and I can't wait for what's next. Really appreciate it.
I thank you very much.
The ML Sports Platter brought to you by Ken's Auto Detailing, Barks and Rec Doggy Daycare, Sit Means Sit Syracuse, and Stanley Law Offices. Together, they'll work to get you the maximum award. A big tip of the cap thank you as well to Brian Comboy of Mass Mutual New York State. Tax-efficient retirement planning today with Brian. Go ahead and visit advisors.massmutual.com for your financial plan. A lot going on later in life. Maybe a youngster going to college, or you're looking to get your retirement in full set up. Go with Brian today, advisors.massmutual.com. He's on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. Awesome to talk to the filmmaker and director, Ken Rodgers. Make sure you watch it. Al Davis versus the NFL, all over the ESPN platform channels, plus ESPN Plus. It's really, really cool. Really, really great. And Four Falls to Buffalo, oh man, can't get enough of that. Can't get enough of it. Thanks again to Ken Rodgers. I'm Mike Lindsley on Twitter at Mike L Sports. All my videos, ML Sports Takes, 9-minute videos, etc., on the major platforms like Facebook, Twitter, IGTV, TikTok, and YouTube. And make sure you get all of these podcasts for the Brawl Network. Download, subscribe, leave feedback, and a 5-star review for them all, including this one, the ML Sports Platter, and hit us on Twitter at Network Brawl. All a part of the Brawl Network. As I always tell you, enjoy the games.